this was now 150, 200 pounds on it, or there were kicks, that edge would be very crisp and clear, very dominant, and would show up in these impressions. In addition, looking within these impressions, the lines that are parallel do not always run parallel to one another. For instance, in this particular one here, there's a few lines that are parallel at this point, a very small area, maybe 1.5 inches square, and now there's some going in a different direction, and now there's some crossing over here going back in this another direction. There's some going this way, and they're all very little partial impressions. Here's two lines that just kind of go out from one another, and that's more typical. The indistinct nature of this imprint, the changing of directions of the parallel lines, the very partial nature of the impressions, the lack of a border, these are typical of imprints of fabric or material and not imprints of shoes.
Now, for the record, the witness is referring to the upper right-hand photograph as you face the board.
Yes.
And that was the lower circle area.
Yes.
Thank you. But, sir, doesn't it appear that there is a sharp line here in the lower circle, and I'm gesturing to the arc that seems to be towards the right side of that circle inside it?
There's that line, there's a line here, there's a line over here with another one next to it. There's some curved lines of all different shapes and sizes around this. In my opinion, this has nothing to do with these parallel lines and is not the edge of the heel. It would be much more, in fact, the parallel lines within, if this were hypothetically a heel, the parallel lines within it are not running straight across it as any shoe design manufacturer would have. They wouldn't have the heel with the lines running crooked. It's just not aesthetically something that they would do in the design and manufacture of that shoe. And these do not even run true to this hypothetical border. But we see this kind of a line all around the jeans, and not being there, I can't account for what that is, but I do not recognize it as a shoe impression or the edge of a heel.
Okay. Now, the parallel lines that you see in the circles on this exhibit, People 619, did you compare those to the parallel lines shown on the envelope and paper?
Yes.
Do they appear to be from the same source?
No.
And tell us why.
The size of these lines and the broadness of them are just totally different in size and features than the very, very small lines which have almost a zigzag to them that were on the fingerprint size impression on the envelope and the wavy pattern in the piece of triangular piece of paper.
So, however, sir, what would you say about the similarity of the parallel lines in the envelope and the piece of paper?
They were consistent with one another within the range of detail that I could see, and in the assessment of them as far as it goes with regard to shoe impressions. They were both totally different, and without any doubt, totally different than these parallel lines that crop up on various places on the right leg of Ron Goldman's jeans.
Okay. So the source of the imprint on the jeans is different from the source of the imprint on the paper and envelope?
Yes, ma'am.
I think you mentioned something about kicking. If you were just kicking someone, maybe with the bottom of your foot, you indicated that you would still leave a border that would be indicative of a shoe print?
Absolutely, and more so than just standing on a person or lightly touching your foot against the person.
Sir, did you hear testimony that Dr. Lee, informing his opinions concerning the impressions on the jeans and on the envelope and paper, did not make any test impressions of the jeans or Ron Goldman's shirt?
Yes, I did.
Do you have an opinion as to whether it is scientifically correct or appropriate to form an opinion concerning the source of an imprint without having made any test impressions?
Yes, and I write about this extensively and teach about it in the lectures I give to examiners with regard to shoe impressions or sock impressions. But the print that's made by a shoe or any object cannot be perceived by looking at that object itself. In other words, you can look at the fabric on my sleeve, and you can look at it with a magnifying glass, but because of its three-dimensional qualities, you could not determine what the exact pattern would look like in a test impression. particularly when you get to like fabrics or like shoe designs. There's no way to perceive that three-dimensional, very, very minute difference in the variations that occur from shoes or fabrics of similar designs. For that reason, even in the preliminary examination stages, it's absolutely essential to make test impressions of shoes or fabric or any other impression materials for comparison purposes. It's the only way that you can make a valid comparison.
Now, the test impressions you're talking about making, are they made with the identicator?
The identicator is one of many materials that I use in making test impressions of known shoes. It initially started as a source of inkless fingerprints, and there are a lot of places in the country use inkless fingerprints. So if you apply for a job and have to be fingerprinted, you don't have to go through the messy ink that you used to go through. I found out about it many years ago. I found out that the Air Force was using it for full barefoot prints of their pilots, because if their pilots were killed in an accident, they would have to sometimes resort to the ridge detail on their feet, because sometimes being in boots, they were the only preserved parts of their body, and they would find that they had to take prints of their full feet in addition to their hands. So they made a much larger pad, bigger than fingerprint size, and we started ordering it, and it's very good for making preliminary comparisons, and in some cases for actually the examination quality, the final product. It actually surpasses other materials in a lot of cases, depending on the shoe or the material.
Now, imprint analysis is that a pretty old science, sir?
It goes back as far as you can read in the forensic literature.
In order to make a valid test impression to compare to a bloody imprint, do you need to make that test impression in blood?
No, and I'd also point that out. That's a fallacy, that you have to reproduce the exact set of circumstances. What you're trying to do when you make a test impression is to reproduce with as much quality as you can all of the features of the shoe or fabric or whatever you're trying to compare. And that is your standard. That is the idealistically best detail that you can get with all of the features exhibited in that known standard that you're comparing. Then you look to the crime scene impressions, and whether they're shoes or fabrics or whatever, those always, almost always, have far less detail and do not reproduce as well because they're not being made as test impressions. They're being made under adverse conditions where the receiving material may be absorbent, like these cotton jeans, or the sidewalk may be very rough and coarse. And so you don't expect to see all of the detail in those kinds of impressions, but you can take the maximum amount of detail in the standard test impression and then compare the respective parts to see if there's any likenesses or differences. If you went and tried to use blood and the exact materials, you would have inferior standards for comparison. You would wind up with a whole another set of problems in that comparison that had nothing to do with your original intended examination.
Now, when you determined that these were not shoe prints, you ultimately gave them to Mr. Diedrich for examination?
Yes, that's correct.
Do you have in the FBI a blood spatter analyst?
I believe we had one. At one time, I think we had two, and I think one of them transferred back out to the field.
You did not give those impressions that you eliminated as being shoe print. The imprints that you determined were not shoe prints. You gave them to Mr. Diedrich. You did not give them to the blood spatter analyst.
That's correct.
Why not?
I had observed the pictures of, and I had examined the jeans, and I also had pictures of the jeans that you see here. And I had also seen enlarged photographs of Ron Goldman's shirt. It was very bloodied, and it had the blood in the picture caused the ribbed design on the shirt to show up very vividly. And so when looking at that, I noticed a striking similarity between that design, even in that smaller photograph, when looking at this. And for that reason, thought the first person that should look at it is Doug Diedrich for doing a fabric analysis.
Is the science of imprint comparison distinct from blood spatter analysis?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you tell us why?
Well, they're like apples and oranges. Imprints or impressions are physical contact between one object and another. And in that physical contact, there's a transfer of both class characteristics with regard to a shoe, the characteristics that all shoes of that size and design would share, as well as wear characteristics and accidental characteristics. And the same would apply for any other imprint, whether it be clothing or whatever. Those general characteristics would be class characteristics that all of those share. And they also, if there were tears or something on a fabric, you could also have accidental characteristics. With regard to blood spatter, there's actually, I work with blood spatter in the sense that I see it on evidence, and there's, as I understand it from my training in the this area, there's two areas.
All right, let's wind it up.
Why don't you complete this answer, sir?
Next question.
Then, is it your opinion, sir, based on what you've told us thus far, that a blood spatter analyst would not be the one to compare a fabric impression in blood to determine what the source of that impression was?
Not unless they had also had training in fabric impressions or shoe prints or whatever they were comparing.
Okay, and training in blood spatter analysis is not required or even helpful in being able to determine the source of an imprint made in blood.
Misleading.
Would blood spatter analysis training assist someone in being able to determine whether a particular item made an imprint in blood?
Not if it was an impression or an imprint, no.
I was going to move on to another area. You want me to go ahead and start?
No, let's take a break. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our recess for the afternoon. Please remember all my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't form any opinions about the case. Don't allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. Don't conduct any deliberations till the matter has been submitted to you. As far as the jury is concerned, we'll stand in recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. We'll take a brief recess to clear the jury, and then I'll see counsel in chambers on the record, please. All right. Thank you.